Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What has traumatized you for life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Worked night shift in a trauma center years ago. Right before shift change, we got a call from EMS. They were bringing us a patient from a motor vehicle accident with CPR in progress. Turns out, it was one of our coworkers on her way to work. EMS got a pulse back, but she died a few days later. I'll never forget the quiet shock trauma room where EMS rolled in with her. I'll never forget taking her off of Lucas device, a machine that does the chest compressions part of CPR, and feeling the frigidity of her hands, seeing her familiar scrubs, her work badge, her signature nursing shoes. Dad, who lived alone at the time, took his life with a firearm in the tub. My mom and I cleaned it up. I was 19, almost 25 now, and it affects me every day. I saw a horrible car accident happen last year. I was the first one to the scene. The driver of one car wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I sat with him, tried to get him talking, monitored his breathing, looked for bleeding. Somebody else called 911. He stopped breathing in my arms mere seconds before help arrived. They weren't able to save him. This is just horrible, and a trigger warning to all of us out here. This post doesn't get much better. The entire thing is pretty dark, so just letting you know. I worked in a retirement home for 2 years as a medication aid caregiver. The last 6 months of my journey there, I was placed on the dementia memory care floor. There was one patient in particular that I got very attached to and would do everything for her. Bathing, feeding, changing, going to bed, etc. She didn't have any living relatives, so I treated her like my own family. One night, as I was feeding her dinner, she started showing signs of a seizure. I immediately called 911 and held her body in the correct position, waiting for them to arrive. The look of pure terror in her eyes as the life faded from her body is now seared into my brain. She died in my arms and was declared DOA by paramedics. I no longer fear death. I fear getting dementia. I had constantly been abused in my mother's house from my stepdad since around 6 years old, and since my mother was absent working all the time, she didn't really notice when he would hit both me and my brother. He's 4 years younger than me. My stepdad was a drunk, never gotten into the working business, and when he did it was a good thing for me and my little brother to be away from that sort of stuff. I had always been like a mother figure to my brother, because I had to fill in the position. We grew up together, as close as two siblings could be. Fast forward years later, I had to be 14 at the time. My stepdad came home one day and said he was tired of me and his son ignoring him and asking to be let out of the house. He was a helicopter parent, and since my mother had recently had another baby boy, I was taking care of him in my room, probably giving him his bottle and trying to sleep. After ignoring him like we always try to do, my stepdad came in, took the baby, and proceeded to throw him against my door. Mother instinct came in, and I automatically fought back for the baby, until the tables turned and my stepdad pulled out a gun. At this point in time, my two brothers were in the room with me watching him take the safety off. He grabbed me by my shirt and pinned me up against the wall at gunpoint. He had yelled at me and kept me pinned for 40 minutes, saying how bad of a daughter I was and ungrateful towards the family. It took a lot of maturity to swallow my pride and admit he was right, so he wouldn't shoot me in front of those boys. I was suicidal at the time, so I didn't really react besides anger, and I wouldn't have cared if he did shoot me because there would eventually be a case of it anyways, but I couldn't leave my brothers without their sister. It was a scary, traumatizing thing for all three of us. Looking back on it, I'm still disgusted at how little as a 6-year-old I was forced to settle in a position I'd never want to take up. I'm glad he finally left those boys alone as soon as I moved away. And as for my mom, she confessed that she knew the abuse had been going on, saying it was a test of how adult I could be at the time. I haven't talked to her since. Good. A friend died right in front of me, doing sprints in track practice. He was 16. Biggest smile and the friendliest guy in the whole school. We were doing sprints, 200 meters, and no shit, on the last one he just collapsed right at the finish. Eyes rolled back, foaming at the mouth, turning blue. Ugh. I ran to the weight room and got my football coach. We ran back to Adam laying in the same spot. They started doing CPR, and I can remember my football coach yelling, "Come on, Adam." The ambulance got there and continued CPR, loaded him up, but he was gone. Turned out he had a valve that was just a bit off in his heart. This guy was an athlete, though. 5th place the year before at the Wisconsin State Wrestling Tournament. Our school had a bunch of freak deaths for some reason. Now I'm a firefighter EMT full-time and do what I can for people when they need help the most. While I was an EMT, I saw a lot of shit. It's not the gore or death that hits you hard. For me, it was this 70-year-old lady whose husband had a pretty major stroke and wasn't responding. She was crying and telling him he couldn't leave her, and she didn't know what she would do without him. She begged us to help him, but there wasn't much we could do. We got him to the hospital, and shortly after my shift ended, I went home and cried for a good 2 hours. She reminded me of my grandma and grandpa is heading down a similar path. I changed my career that year as I came to realize I'm too empathetic for that job, and it was affecting me negatively. At the age of 11, my father went into the basement to work on some parts. This was quite common. My mother had just gotten home from work and went to take a shower. 20 minutes go by, and she gets out wondering where my father is. We go and check on him in the basement. To my shock, he's lying on the floor, his tongue out, blue in the face, not moving or breathing. He had died from a sudden heart attack. My mother and I tried for over an hour to resuscitate him with CPR. It took that whole time frame for an ambulance to arrive. They did nothing but declare that he was dead. The 3rd anniversary of his death was 3 days ago. It never gets easier trying to understand that he will never be back. I will forever be traumatized by this event. When I was 17, my boyfriend killed himself by jumping into traffic. His body was pulverized and scattered all over the road and run over hundreds of times. The police spray painted every piece. It was a highway that I would normally drive over regularly. I drove over it once and lost it. For 5 years, I took the long way around until the paint faded. Attempted suicide of my girlfriend of 10 years, then a completed suicide a year later. The 2nd anniversary of her death is next week. Can't sleep. Lost 40 pounds. Still here because her now 17-year-old dog needs me. My partner of nearly 14 years surprised me one day by telling me that he was leaving me for my best friend. They had been having an affair behind my back for over a year. All of my friendship group knew about it before me. Took me completely by surprise. The fact that the people I loved and trusted most in the world had been deceiving me for so long utterly destroyed me. Took me about a year of self-destructive behavior to finally get to what you'd call a complete breakdown, where I just couldn't function properly anymore. It's been 15 years, and my life is amazing now. I learned so much about myself and know that I am stronger than I sometimes give myself credit for. I'm now engaged to the most incredible man in the world, and I'm settled and much happier. But I'd be lying if I said that experience didn't fundamentally change me forever. It took me a long time to trust anyone again, and has affected, even in some small way, every single friendship and relationship I've had since then. Would you rather be hurt than deceived? That's the conundrum here. Obviously, you'd want neither. That your lover stepped out on you is terrible, but that your friends did that to you is just tragic, and they were not your friends. Daily psychological abuse by veteran alcoholic father when mom wasn't home. He'd have me stand in a corner and stare at it for the whole day, usually as punishment for something small like making a noise while I eat or crying when he screamed. I wasn't allowed to move, and he'd constantly spy on me to see if I obeyed. I never knew when I'd get out of the corner. That was the trick. No freedom, and not knowing when you'd get out. Then mom would come home around 4 to 5 p.m. and I'd be free. Then there was the physical abuse. No sexual abuse, at least, thank God. Where do I start? When I was 4, my mother put me and my 2-year-old brother outside so she could take a nap. He ran into traffic and was run over by a van. Oh my God. When the ambulance came, I was left alone until my grandmother was able to come get me. Many members of my family still blame me for what happened to my brother. I'm in my 60s, and she and I still have this wall between us. She continued to push childcare on me, and I'd lost out on many childhood experiences because of it. My grandparents were mentally abusive because of it. I married an abusive man because that is what I was used to. He divorced me when I got cancer. It has taken me a long time and a lot of therapy to recover from the first 40 years of my life. My friend lost her baby full term, went into labor, and the baby died in her womb during labor. After she delivered him, she couldn't bear to look at him or hold him, but also didn't want him taken away. She asked me to hold him for her. I held that baby all day. In the beginning, he looked just like he was sleeping, with a blue tinge to his lips, but by the end of the day, the body was deteriorating quickly. It was so hard to witness the slow decay of something so precious and innocent. To this day, even though the image is vivid as ever, I can't bring myself to describe how he looked. At the point I struggled to even look at that baby, but that's when she wanted to hold him and look at him, and I had to gently explain to her that he did not look the same as he did when she delivered him, and that it might be too traumatic for her. We agreed she needed to remember him as the beautiful baby he was. I wrapped him gently and covered his face. She gave him a kiss all covered up. The nurses took him away. One of the most tragic moments of her life and mine. My condolences to all the moms out there who've lost children. I feel for you. Waking up from a coma after 6 weeks to find out my wife was dead and buried. Whoa. I lost 8 businesses. My best friend stole all my money. My business partners destroyed contracts to take ownership of my business. Then, to top it off, Mexican law meant my in-laws had to sue me to claim certain things that belonged to me and my wife, like our homes, cars, and savings. I had a hole in my head, broken ribs, couldn't walk for 6 months. I realized after this, you are truly on your own in this life. Nobody will save you. Well, if this doesn't sound like the opening 15 minutes of the next Liam Neeson movie going straight to video, I don't know what does. Still sorry that it happened. Not being shown affection as a baby or child, I have grown up with severe separation issues, am clingy, afraid of everything, and made bad decisions about relationships, i.e. being with someone just so I'm not alone. It really affects you for life. Please hug your kids and tell them you love them every day. It's so simple, but is so important. When I was 6, I was running home from school and I fell in some deep body of water and it pulled me away, and I was deep under it for a good minute, and I remember it was dark and couldn't breathe until my cousin and my dad managed to catch up and get me out. Now I'm scared of pools, beaches, lakes, and types of body of water, especially the ones I can't see the bottom of. I was like 8, and my mom left me to watch my 2-year-old brother at a park while she drank and talked with some friends of hers. My dad came and took my brother to use the restroom, and I forgot because I was playing with other kids at the party. She came over and asked where he is, and I didn't know. So she grabbed me roughly and started to drag me to look for him before we came over to a guy with crutches who said he saw him go with a man. My mom began to scream at me. She hated me, and she wished I was dead, and it should have been me, while I cried with her, dragging me. Then we saw my dad and little sister come out of the restroom with my brother. My mom let go and told me to go and play, and I didn't, and she threatened to give me something to cry about as I sulked on a park bench before my dad sent me off to go play. Jeez Christ. My mother's helicopter parenting. Now that I have to take care of her in her old age, she throws an effing temper tantrum at the slightest hint that things aren't going to go her way. Just now, she wants chicken soup. She took an hour to explain how to make chicken soup. Her version has 5 ingredients. I suggested adding some herbs for flavoring, and she is currently screaming down the hall at me about how stupid I am for not knowing how to make chicken soup. Every interaction is like this. I wish you would die soon so I can have my sanity back. Easy. I was violently raped in an alley by a stranger. God. But maybe the even more effed up part was the way I was treated by people who are supposed to help you afterwards. When I went to the hospital for the rape kit, where you're basically in a vulnerable position all over that I won't even describe, the woman said, "Wow, there's a lot of semen in there," which made me cry. Then the reporting process was effing horrible. In recorded interviews, the detectives asked me things like, why didn't I scream, and how could this have happened when there was an officer patrolling that very busy area? Then they effed up my rape kit. There was no justice, and honestly, If it ever happened to me again, I would not report it. This country does not care. Now I have PTSD and can't go out at night. I also have PTSD from another traumatic event I won't go into, but I'm working on it in EMDR therapy. Except now my therapist got a new job, so I have to start with someone new, and I don't know if I can take it. Watching my brother die in a car crash that left me disabled. He was 8. A friend, 16, being hit by the train while trying to escape harassment on his way to work. Then, having to work through my shift at the place he worked at as well, immediately after because we're understaffed. A friend, 19, dying from a tainted batch of drugs, and his funeral being at the funeral home the aforementioned car crash happened in front of. My brother died on the lawn of the funeral home. You know what's less shortened than a bit? Only a handful of my friends and family are still kicking. High-risk lifestyles will do that. Thankfully, I'm out of that life. Also, my dog being poisoned and then having to have her seizing and foaming to the emergency vet. We couldn't save her, and watching her try to cuddle me while she died, that was horrifying and made me an avid anti-poison person. Good. For any form of extermination or pest control. The poisoned food was dropped by a bird into my yard, and the dogs got it. Wildlife are smarter than people think a lot of the time. My husband's first manic episode, we had no idea he had bipolar disorder. Something in his eyes was so terrifying. It wasn't him, and I couldn't explain to anyone. His mom saw it. Same with siblings and my folks, but tried to convince a professional that he just isn't him. Didn't get support and diagnosis for another 7 years. This life has been a wild ride, and most days have flashbacks, but with a solid support team and the right meds and therapies, the nightmares are gone, and I honestly really enjoy my life. It's been a total shit show, but I can't say it hasn't been a lot of fun as well. For anyone suffering out there, please know that you aren't alone, and there are ways to successfully thrive after living in chaos for ages. It's not the most comfortable at first when you're accustomed to discomfort, but it's so worth it. This was 2 months ago. My girlfriend and I had just been on a spa stay at a fancy hotel. She gave it for my birthday like a year ago, but because of COVID, we couldn't get the opportunity. Anyway, we're driving home pretty tired and happy because of the stay we had. As we're driving just outside the city, I look to my left and I see a woman walking on a path at the side of the road. Just 100 meters up the highway, a car comes speeding and he takes a sharp right turn, hitting the woman. It was pretty dark, but in his light I could literally see her body explode into pieces. In shock, I hit the brake. My girlfriend screams, and not because she saw it. I screamed, "That car just effing hit her." She doesn't understand, but I tell her to stay in the car, as she is very thankful for me to say to this day today. Why? Because what I later saw was pure chaos. It was only me at the scene. I had to walk up to the dead body parts and a clearly drunk driver and still take this situation under control and call 911. I'm not going to go into detail since I'm still dealing with the horror I saw there. All I can say is that ever since that night, I have no longer taken a sip of beer, driving at night, or just casual speeding. That was hard to read. The ER waiting room. I fell off a cliff when I passed out from heat exhaustion on a hike during a 100-degree summer day. The only external injuries were a gash on my chin, but for whatever reason, the staff thought I was high on something, and I heard them in their little area making fun of me and laughing. I knew it was me because I was the only one in the waiting room for 10 hours. Well, when the doctor finally saw me and took my blood, they found out I was bleeding internally with multiple lacerated and ruptured organs with a collapsed lung. For 10 hours, I sat there in a wheelchair, in the most pain I've ever been in, and not a single patient came in. The only people I saw were those nurses laughing at me. Every time I would wail out in pain, they'd laugh and say shit like, "He's probably just tripping hard right now."